Hello, everyone. This is Giselle. I am a faculty member that works in the Writing Support Center, and I am here today to present the Plagiarism and Paraphrasing What's the Difference workshop. Today, we're going to be covering plagiarism and paraphrasing. These are two things that sometimes get confused. Sometimes students paraphrase or what they think is paraphrase, and it actually ends up being plagiarism. So in this workshop, we're just going to think about the differences between the two, and we're also going to practice how we might write an effective paraphrase. So let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, the objective of this workshop is to clarify how to keep from unintentionally plagiarism. Like I said, sometimes students sometimes do this, of course, unintentionally, and it is when they're trying to paraphrase a text. I want you to be able to understand these differences once we finish this workshop. And I also want to state that we're going to be going through some practice exercises to help you identify the differences between plagiarism and paraphrasing. There's actually a processing worksheet available for you to download. I would highly recommend that you download this worksheet, as doing the exercises are going to help you understand the content a little bit better. This worksheet can also be used as a sort of proof that you went through this workshop if your professor is offering extra credit for this workshop, or any of the other workshops that we're offering through Canvas. You can actually find other workshops that we've done in the module section of this Canvas page, and you can also look at those if you're interested. But like I said, I really suggest that you download that worksheet. If you haven't yet, go ahead and pause this video and you'll be able to find this worksheet in the same place that you found this workshop. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I just want to start with a brief definition of what plagiarism is. So at its very basic level, plagiarism is the act of using someone else's work or ideas without crediting the original author. Plagiarism can happen not only in writing, it can also happen in music, it can happen in, TV shows or movies, it can happen in any form of art. The act of using someone else's work or plagiarism can happen in many spaces outside of writing. In this workshop in particular, of course, because this is the Writing Support Center, we're going to be covering what plagiarism is in terms of writing. Plagiarism can be both intentional and unintentional. This means that the writer may have meant to plagiarize, or they might have done it on accident. Unintentional plagiarism might happen when you forget to credit an author, or if you paraphrase an author's words too closely to the original. Paraphrasing is much more than changing a few words around, something we're going to be covering during this workshop. Which is why plagiarism may happen when you are trying to paraphrase. So just say you find this great passage, you don't want to use the whole passage, so you decide to paraphrase it instead. However, you can't just simply change those words. We're going to be covering some strategies for how you can effectively paraphrase. So stay tuned to see how you might do that. If you intentionally plagiarize, on the other hand, this results in a situation where you are trying to pass off someone else's ideas as your own. This is a big academic no-no and can have serious consequences, anywhere from failing the assignment to failing the class to being removed from the school. It all depends on the institution's rules on plagiarism and academic dishonesty. So at the end of the day, just don't do it. Try to avoid it unintentionally. And that's mostly what we're covering. Intentional plagiarism is different in that it is something that is done with the author's knowing of the action. So for this workshop in specifically, we're going to be covering how to avoid unintentionally plagiarize. So these are some examples of what plagiarism might look like. These are taken from turnitin.com. I'll be supplying that link at the end of the workshop. But the first thing that you might do that is considered plagiarism is called cloning. This is when you submit someone else's work, word for word, as one's own. So this can happen in a variety of ways. It can be done when you directly take a passage from, someone else's writing and you just copy and paste it into your work. That's submitting someone else's work as your own word for word. It's not even changing some of the words. It's all another person's writing. This kind of plagiarism can also happen if you submit someone else's essay as your own. Say you pay for an essay, or a friend lets you borrow an essay they submitted for class. Submitting that work as your own is considered plagiarism because you are taking that assignment and submitting it word for word and passing it off as your own. Cloning is typically something that is intentional plagiarism. I know that some different countries have different understandings of plagiarism. So this might be okay somewhere else, but for our purposes, in the classrooms at PCC, you definitely cannot do this. This is not, this is considered academic dishonesty, so you never want to clone someone's work. There's also Control C. For those of you who know keyboard shortcuts, Control C actually stands for copying. That's the keyboard shortcut to copy something. This happens when you take a quote and it contains significant portions of text from a single source without alterations. So this is just, it's similar to cloning. It's just taking a piece of someone else's work and then passing it off as your own. You don't alter it, so you don't change any of the wording. You just copy and paste, say like a paragraph from somewhere else, and then submit it. That would be plagiarism. There's also find and replace, which is when you just change keywords and phrases, but you retain the essential content of the source. So we're going to go over again what effective paraphrasing looks like in a little bit. But paraphrasing is much more than just changing words and phrases. You have to understand the content of the source, and finding and replacing keywords doesn't allow for a deeper understanding, which is why it's still considered plagiarism. There's also this idea of remixing, which is paraphrasing from multiple sources and fitting it together. So say you have 3 great sources on The Great Gatsby, and then you decide, I like this idea from this source, this idea from this source, and this idea from this source. If you don't paraphrase those or quote them, but you just throw them into a paragraph and you don't cite them, that's considered plagiarism, even if the ideas are coming from different sources. It's still considered plagiarism. There's also the act of recycling, which borrows generously from the writer's previous work without citation. So this is considered plagiarism. It's when you have written an assignment for, say, like a different class or for something else, and you decide you want to recycle whatever you used from that previous class for this class. That's considered plagiarizing yourself, because the whole point of doing these assignments is for you to, increase your understanding. And if you are just recycling something that you used in a previous course, then that would be considered plagiarism, and you cannot reuse that. So just keep that in mind. Say you are retaking a class, or say you're taking a class that is covering similar material as a class you're currently taking, you still don't want to recycle ideas, or you can recycle or, think of ideas, similar ideas. You just can't recycle the same papers, the same paragraphs from your previous work. Always try to create original work, because yes, it is possible to plagiarize yourself. So those were some of the forms of plagiarism. We're going to move into what paraphrasing is so that you can get a sense of how they are different. So with paraphrasing, this is a simple and basic definition, which is rephrasing the original text in your own words and crediting the author. A key thing in this definition is that you credit the author. It is important that you credit the author, as this is the main thing that differentiates a paraphrase from plagiarism. For MLA formatted papers, this means using in-text citations and listing the source on your works cited page. Paraphrasing is essentially one way you can borrow from a source in addition to quoting. So you can quote, you can paraphrase. Both are acceptable ways to get a secondary source into your writing. Some might think that paraphrasing is simply a summary or rephrasing, like this definition says. However, it is actually more detailed in that it focuses on one single idea. Summaries tend to be more general, whereas a paraphrase highlights key information. So if there's key information you want to highlight for the purpose of improving your argument or getting your thesis across by providing this evidence, you want to be sure to focus in on that key information that you need to support your argument. So that's why paraphrasing is really useful, or at least one reason why paraphrasing is really useful. When writing an essay, sometimes paraphrasing is better than quoting information from a long passage. You might be able to get the main idea of the passage across clearer with less words. So say you find this really great quote, but it's about 5 lines of text long. That's a lot of text to put into your essay. A great thing to do would be to read through that passage, think about what the key points are that you need to prove your argument from that passage, and then synthesize it. This is good because it helps you control having too many quotes. And it also helps you control how much you're actually putting from secondary sources into your work. A paraphrase, again, is going to help you get those ideas across in a clearer manner and with less words. And it also helps your reader focus on what's most important to your argument. So again, like I said, I mentioned paraphrasing is also going to help you control having too many quotes. For example, you might already have quoted something in one paragraph, but you want to add more information. A paraphrase would be good for this situation. Also, having to paraphrase can allow you to better grasp the full meaning of the original passage or quote. So if you need to understand a quote or a passage better, paraphrasing, forcing you to critically think about it, is going to help you understand it better in the end. So sometimes paraphrasing is preferred to quoting. You just need to make sure you're always citing the original source. Okay, so I just want to take some time to reflect. So just thinking about what we just went over about plagiarism and paraphrasing, I want you to think about these 2 questions. They are question number 1 on your worksheet. So if you can fill them out there, that would be perfect. The 2 questions I want you to think about are, why might someone confuse plagiarism and paraphrasing? Have you ever felt confused by the differences between plagiarism and paraphrasing? So go ahead and reflect for a moment on your worksheet. Go ahead and pause right here, and we'll continue whenever you complete that question. All right, so I hope you wrote something down on your worksheet. Now we're going to review some of what you might have written. So these are some of the reasons for confusion between plagiarism and paraphrasing. Some students may think that changing words in a quote qualifies as a paraphrase. This is not the case. So this is something I mentioned earlier. When you paraphrase, you need to do more than just change words in the quote or the passage. You need to be able to critically think about those ideas being presented in the passage. So that's one thing that differentiates plagiarism and paraphrasing. It's also a reason why people might think that that paraphrasing is plagiarism, or that, vice versa. So it's important to think about doing more than just changing words so that you don't unintentionally plagiarize when you are paraphrasing. A paraphrase also requires you to critically think, just like I said, about what the author is saying in order to understand it more deeply. It's more than just repeating ideas, which is what plagiarism is. So when you take a quote and then you change a word here or there, you're just repeating the idea, but you're not critically and deeply thinking about what it means. You might be actually, but paraphrasing allows you to use your critical thinking skills in order to think of it more deeply. Paraphrasing is also a good technique to say if you want to think about something critically, maybe you don't want to actually paraphrase something, but you just want to think deeper about it. Using paraphrasing techniques might help you think more deeply about a quote or a passage you might be having trouble understanding. So just keep that in mind. People confuse the two because they think paraphrasing is just restating something differently. It's more than that. It's definitely critically thinking, whereas plagiarism doesn't require much of that. So these are some tips for effective paraphrasing. On the left side, you can think of this as ideas of how you want to paraphrase, ideas for paraphrasing that are short and simple. So here on the left side, these are some short and simple guidelines for how to paraphrase. And here on the right, you're going to get a step-by-step method for paraphrasing. So this is just for you to quickly think about what paraphrasing is. So change both the words and the structure of the original sentence. So this is key. Like I said, it's not just simply changing words, you're changing the structure of the sentence as well. You're also putting any of the source's original phrasing in quotation marks. So if it's not using the same words. If you use the same words as the original, you don't need to put those words into quotation marks unless they are very specific words, but it's mostly just the phrasing. So if you take a phrase or a short, line of 4 to 6 words, you need to make sure you're putting that in quotation marks. You're still paraphrasing, but you're making sure that any original phrasing that the author used, you are putting in quotation marks and not using it as your own. You also, as I said before, need to include an in-text citation to tell readers that the source of your paraphrase. So even if you're not using quotation marks as you would with a quote, you still need to make sure you are providing that in-text citation for your readers so they know where you got this information. Like I said, here on the right side, you're going to get a step-by-step process for paraphrasing. Number 1, reread the original passage until you understand its full meaning. So the key thing, like I said before about paraphrasing, is that you understand what you are paraphrasing. If you do not understand the quote, you need to spend a little more time with it or see a tutor or ask your professor to help you uncover that meaning a little more. You need to make sure you understand it fully before you try to paraphrase it. You also need to do number 2, which is set the original aside and write your paraphrase on a note card. So you don't need to do this, but this is a tip that will help you with your paraphrase. So after thinking about the original, don't look at it, just sit down and write your paraphrase on a note card, a journal, on the computer, whatever it might be. So just go ahead and write it down, letting the original sit on the sidelines so that you're not tempted to reuse whatever the author might have written in the original. Number 3, jot down a few words below your paraphrase to remind you later how you envision using the material. At the top of the note card, write a key word or phrase to indicate the subject of your paraphrase. So this will help you. So say we're envisioning this paraphrase as an activity to help you understand how to paraphrase. So you can, if you're having trouble paraphrasing, definitely try this at home. Just go ahead and write down that paraphrase, write down how you're going to use it in your essay, and then just write down the keyword or phrase or for the subject of your paraphrase, so you know how to use it when you come back to use this in your essay. Number 4, you want to check your rendition with the original to make sure that your version accurately expresses all the essential information in a new form. So after you've written your paraphrase, then you should look at the original to make sure you are clearly getting across the ideas you'd like to get across. This also ensures that you're not copying any of the original or plagiarizing any of the original. It's just making sure that you have the essential ideas that you wanted to get across from the original. Number 5, use quotation marks to identify any unique term or phraseology you have borrowed exactly from the source. So this is similar to this one, put any of the source's original phrasing in quotation marks. This is because you're using those quotation marks only when you're using anything unique or a phrase that you wouldn't see normally. Maybe it's a phrase the author coined. Maybe it's a term that's specific to the work you're using to quote. Just make sure you're still quoting anything that's different or something that you wouldn't typically find in other works. And then number 6, record the source, including the page, on your note card so that you can credit it easily if you decide to incorporate the material into your paper. So this is just making sure that you're writing down the actual source materials information. So this is the author, the article title, so that you don't forget where you got the quote. And then you can just easily throw that into, if you put down all the information from the source, you can easily put that into your in-text citations and your MLA Works Cited page. So number 6 is just a time-saving technique for you to think about. So this is one way for you to practice paraphrasing, especially if it's something you're new to, but it's definitely not the only way to do it. But it's definitely one way to get started if you're new to paraphrasing. So for this next few slides, we're going to be practicing paraphrasing. So I just want you to practice paraphrasing using this following quote, and make sure to properly cite, preferably in MLA format. But if this is if you are writing for a lot more APA format classes, you can also use that. Whatever works best for your needs, but if you're English 1A or ESL, I recommend using MLA citation in order to format this quote. So the quote reads, "Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes." And then this right here, Lester James D. Writing Research Paper, 2nd edition, 1976, pages 46 to 47. This right here is the citation. So using this original quote, I want you to take a second to practice paraphrasing this. It's question number 2 on your worksheet. Go ahead and use the techniques we just covered to practice paraphrasing. And then pause right here, and once you're done, go ahead and push play and we will continue. Okay, so depending on what you wrote, it's probably going to look different from this. It may look similar, but this is an example of an acceptable paraphrase. So in research papers, students often quote excessively, failing to keep quoted material down to a desirable level. Since the problem usually originates during note-taking, it is essential to minimize the material recorded verbatim. And then the in-text citation in proper MLA citation format, Lester 46 to 47, and then period. So the paraphrase version is much more concise. It is shorter, it is clearer than the original. It is 2 sentences versus the 3 sentences in the original quote. The main point is also much clearer in the paraphrase, which is that students quote excessively. Right here, students often quote excessively due to note-taking, and they can fix this by minimizing how much they write down while taking notes. That's the main point of the quote, and they get that very on the nose here in the paraphrase. I get this point much quicker with the paraphrase, which is an example why paraphrasing might be better at times. Maybe the author or the student who wrote this paraphrase wanted to make it clear that this is what they wanted to get across. Obviously, we don't know what their paper is about, but they make that point really clear with this paraphrase versus it's not as clear in the original, but obviously this is what the writer wanted the reader to take away. They also changed the wording significantly. For example, in the original passage, the author, James D. Lester, wrote, "Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes." The student paraphrased it to say, "Students often quote excessively." Notice how much more concise that line is versus this one. So the student did a good job here by using the paraphrase to pare down the original quote. Lester, the author, is also cited, as I said, in correct MLA format. This is important whenever paraphrasing. There's no quotation marks like you would have with a quote, but regardless, you still need to make sure you are citing the source. You need to cite the author and the original source just as you would with a quotation. So that means using in-text citations and listing it on the MLA Works Cited page. This is what a plagiarized version of that might look like. So like I said, we looked at the original, the paraphrase, and now this is what a plagiarized version might look like. Students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper. In fact, probably only about 10% of the final copy should consist of directly quoted material. So it is important to limit the amount of source material copied while taking notes. So thinking about this plagiarized version and the original, I want you to think about why this sample would be considered plagiarism. This is question 3 on your worksheet. The original and the plagiarized version is also on the worksheet, so that might help you look at them side by side. Go ahead and do question number 3. Pause right here, and we will continue once you finish that question. Okay, so this is what I noticed were reasons for the original passage and the plagiarized version being an example of plagiarism. So I highlighted here to make it a little bit more visually apparent why this version is plagiarism. So if you look at the left side, frequently overused direct quotations in taking notes. The plagiarized version says often use too many direct quotations when they take notes. So it's essentially the same sentence, just worded differently. They change frequently to often. They change overuse to use too many. Again, direct quotation is exactly the same, and in taking notes is changed to when they take notes. They essentially just change phrasing, but it's all exactly the same. Syntax, formatting, not much is changing here. Second is as a result, they change to resulting. Again, very similar. They change final quote to research, or I'm sorry, final parentheses research paper to final research paper. So they just get rid of the parentheses. In fact, probably only about 10% is pretty much the same with probably only about 10%. The difference in the plagiarized version is that they add this little signal phrase. And then here it says limit the amount. Again, limit the amount using the same exact wording. Here they didn't even try to change that wording. And then finally, source materials while taking notes. Here it says source materials copied while taking notes. So they just add the word copied here. If you notice, both sides are also 3 sentences long. So this is what I mean when I say you can't just take words and change them around. This is considered plagiarism because it's very similar to the original passage. Phrasing is changed very little, words are changed, but much of it is still the original passage. This is plagiarism. Again, this is not paraphrasing even. So even if you were to throw in the author's citation right here, it still wouldn't be enough, as this is not taking it, the original, critically thinking about it as the acceptable paraphrase did. It's literally just changing words around, keeping the same exact format. So it's plagiarism. You definitely want to avoid doing this when you paraphrase. It is not a good example at all of what paraphrasing looks like. You would definitely, your instructor or any instructor would definitely consider something like this plagiarism. So of course, with a plagiarism workshop, I need to list my own sources. These are sources that you can use if you'd like to learn more about the topic. The OWL Purdue Online Writing Lab is a great place to go for not only plagiarism information, but information about writing in general if you haven't been there already. The plagiarism spectrum is the image I took that showed the different types of plagiarism. It's from Turnitin. They also have some more sources about what plagiarism looks like if you'd like to learn more about that. And then this Scribr link also talks about the differences between plagiarism and paraphrasing. I also suggest that you look at our DLAs. While this is not a DLA workshop, we actually have 2 separate directed learning activities available on plagiarism and paraphrasing. Some of the ideas in this workshop and some of the exercises have come from the DLAs. You can take a look at those if you'd like. They're on the Canvas page, and you can find them there under modules. So go ahead and go look at those if that's something you're interested in learning about. Thank you for tuning in to this workshop. Please tune in next week for more workshops. Actually, next week is spring break, so please tune in the week after for more workshops. If you're interested, we'll be posting these hopefully once a week, at least once a week, so keep an eye out for them. Thank you.